Hello, everyone. We are back for week 2 of our 4-session series with myself, Brooke Koeninger, and Jennifer Kok. Let me see if I can get her on here. Give me a second. Oh, there we go. Jen, let me actually accept. There she comes.
Hello.
Hello.
I always think I'm going to be quick on the trigger, and it just never works trying to get this going live here.
Hey, I'm just glad you're doing it because I'm just over here just drinking a cup of tea. Like, yeah, she'll include me when she gets to it.
I know, right? Welcome back. Week 2.
Week 2. Happy spring.
I know this is a beautiful day here on the East Coast. Anyone who's tuning in, it is finally, and day 1 of spring actually, but the weather is actually showing it. So hopefully it sticks here.
Lucky you, because yesterday it was almost 70 and sunny in Michigan, and today we had snow on the first day of spring.
Are you kidding me?
No.
Are you having whiplash?
Yeah.
Everyone's going to be sick. That's what's going to happen.
Yeah. That's just kind of what we do. Yeah.
Just a little teaser. While you still live in Chicago, right there on Lake Michigan, I know it can just go. It could swing wildly both ways too. I can imagine.
It's crazy. So sorry if I just hit something that messed up.
No. Okay. So last week we talked about knowing your numbers, setting your goals, and we did touch relatively a lot about profitability, pricing. But this week we wanted to dig deep into that because I know that's something that a lot of people struggle with, want to know if they're doing it right. So we figured this week we're just going to cover that. I thought maybe we could start, if you wanted to, or I can jump in, why this is such an important topic. I mean, we know I've just mentioned there's a lot of people that ask about it, but where have you seen it come up in issues or questions with your clients in particular?
I mean, I think pricing your products it can feel really vulnerable, especially if you are service-based, you're a solo entrepreneur, you're doing the work. So, if you're a photographer or, an artist or anywhere along those lines, it feels, it can just feel really like transparent. And so you start to doubt yourself, you start to wonder if your prices are right. And I think the other thing too is honestly, when we start a business, we don't know, we're just picking a number.
Throwing sheet and stuff in the wind here too. And I know starting a business, and I'll just speak from my personal experience too, coming from corporate where you kind of knew you had a salary, you had a job, going into a different world where you're like, what am I worth, honestly? And it brings up a lot of feelings, specifically in the service-based industry, or if you're in consulting or any coaching, what is the value of your hour? What of your time? And so trying to, like you just said, there's a lot of vulnerability in that. One of the things I see with my clients too on the product side, and we can dig into some common maybe pitfalls that we see, is getting in your mind. I mentioned this last week, is there's a lot of thought around the top line growth. How many units do you want to sell? How many, what's your sales numbers going to be overall? But so I see a lot of my clients have in their mind like a gross margin. I'm just going to mark up my inventory 40%, 50%. What they don't realize is the time that's included there, and they're not fully calculating all the costs. So they're actually losing money on some of their products when they really look at like, oh, my employees are spending 2 times their hours on this product versus this product to create. And so when we really dig into it, we see where you're spending a ton of your time, but actually losing money on it, which can be.
Yeah. No, I hear you. And time is probably one of the biggest first areas. And the other thing too is just because today you're doing it doesn't mean down the road you should be the person creating the earrings or, cutting the grass, whatever your business is. So I always like to say price from the get-go, like you have to outsource, like you have to pay somebody, like you have to hire someone to do that work. And what would you have to pay them per hour? That needs to be included in your price. And we most of the time do not include that until later on in the game.
Let's dig into that a little bit too, because that's such a good point. Is how do you know? I think the first step in figuring out what your price is, you start with your costs. And so you're alluding to that too. So there is hard costs that if you are in a product, if you are even, I think you and I had talked about, even like maybe a landscaping business, you have you're buying mulch, you're buying, there's specific cost, you're buying things. So you know what those costs are. So that's one thing that's going to go into the creation of your product or service to be able to sell. But there's other things that factor into that too, like you're saying. So there's labor, but labor can be yourself and your time. So that's what exactly like you said, I like to say is, or I like to tell my clients is, if you aren't at the point yet where you've hired people to build your product, you need to factor in your own hours and what you would have to pay someone to do your job for you. And so what is the market would it pay labor for that to replace yourself in the future?
Yeah, pad that in right from day one. You know, what is a fair market wage to hire someone, like in this instance, a landscaper to mow? You know, is it $20 an hour? Well, then we need to be factoring that into the cost of our, you know, the final cost that we're charging our customers. Absolutely.
So if we start from the bottom, so we build our costs. So we know we really spend some time looking at our costs, looking at our costs for each specific product or service, because that can be different. So then we think about, we can go two ways. One, let's first talk about, okay, there's a margin, there's a markup. So I say you like to look at the market, which I think you work with your clients too. So what are others pricing and where do you want to be based on that? Are you a premium? Do you want to be the discount provider? So that's going to give you some leeway in terms of what your pricing should be, but there's also a goal margin. And I don't know if you have, I think you and I talked about this a little bit offline about what, like some high level guidelines, which certainly are different based on what industry you're in, if you're selling a product again or a service. But in general, that markup percentage, I like to say if you're a service, you should take your costs and you should double it. You should double it and then see what that is in the market based on you know, how long you've been doing what you've been doing, where others are. If you are a product, you have probably got some more costs be just from inventory and the stuff you have to buy. You at least want to be a 30% markup at least. So depending on where you are again in your industry, I don't know if that's similar to kind of what you're seeing with some of your clients if they're looking at benchmarking.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the reason I think looking at the growth, so that's called the gross profit margin, that margin. The reason I think that is so imperative is sometimes, let's say, you know, we're figuring out what we want to charge, we figure out our costs, and we make $25 a unit or $25 a service. For some of us, just looking at that hard number, it might feel like, oh, that's good, I'm good. But then if you then calculate the gross profit margin and it's only at 30%, well, that's not good. Because, you know, I always say you've got basically 30 cents on the dollar, every dollar you sell. If you're 30% gross profit, you've got 30 cents left over to pay everything else that goes into owning and operating a business, which is a lot. Subscriptions, if you're a brick and mortar, rent, all of that. And so I always find when I do this calculation with my clients, there's this little bit of a, oh, you know, they thought they were priced where they should be. And then the margin came in a little low. The gross profit margin comes in a little low. And it gives you permission to raise your prices. And it's a little bit of a, first of all, kind of that, oh, wow moment. But then it's a little bit of like, oh, all right, you know, I'm going to raise my prices. So I think paying attention to the margin is huge. So back to your point, what should be the margin? And, you know, this is a debate, right? You know, like I agree. I think most gross profit margins should be 50% or higher. And I think if you Google your industry, because some industries, you know, might be a little lower. But I think, you know, if you're only making 30, 40% gross profit margin, at the end of the day, it's going to be really hard to be profitable. Because you long term.
And you mentioned this too, but we're talking gross profit. So that's before you take any, you know, rent, utilities, all those operating costs, software, travel, training, whatever it may be, which is to run your business. And even again, if you're just starting off and maybe you don't have all of that loaded in, you want to price appropriately, assuming that that's where your business is going to go. And the other thing, we will talk about this in a future session, but it's also factoring in paying yourself, because you are the business. You're the reason that this business is around. And that's often the first thing that gets taken out. And we don't take that into consideration when we're pricing. I do want to talk about, there's an aspect, and I see a lot of my clients, and I'm curious how you handle this, is whether you're just starting off or you find yourself in seasonality and so it's a slow time. I see a lot of clients accepting lower profit margins. And so I think there's an aspect of allowing for that and but being really, really strategic about it. And because oftentimes what I find is you can get locked into this lower price because, you know, it's a slower time and you just want to fill up. You already have existing headcount that you want them to be busy during these slower times, but it's done in more of a reactive way, and then not with the intention that we will raise them again when, you know, really educating the consumer or your client ahead of time that it's discounted because of this. And so I don't know if you find that too. It's either, it has to be more of a strategic reason that you might come in and take a lower profit margin.
Yeah. And I'm not big fan of discounting. I'll be honest with you.
Okay.
I feel like you price your stuff based on the value and the best service that the client or customers are going
Yep.
to get, and you own it and you be proud of it,
Yes.
and don't let customers bully you into a lower price. And that's kind of how it feels. And
Yeah.
I understand what you mean by the seasonality, that,
Yeah.
there are some times when you might need to do something just to keep some cash flow coming in. And that's a little bit different. But if you can word it in a way or
Yeah.
package it in a way that it's not a discount,
Yeah.
sometimes you got to move stuff. If you're a product and you got to change inventory, you got to move it out, and that's fine. But for service-based businesses, I always like to say, maybe you change the package a little bit. Instead of 3 sessions, it's 4 for the same price. So at least it feels like you're not discounting, but you are giving, value
A
add.
little
You're
bit
adding
more.
more.
Yeah, a little bit more value. Um, I like that. I like that. And you're absolutely right too. There's ways to bundle services, bundle packages, or
Yeah.
like I said too, I just like to really, there's early bird discounts if you can get your guys out there. I know, like, let's use tree trimming, for instance, when it's off season and you're paying your employees anyways, but you can, early season,
Yeah.
specials and all this type of stuff. They can really, the consumer knows it's not devaluing your service or your product. It's providing a promotion or whatever it may be
And
too. So
those are great. Early bird pricing, that just, that gets
yeah,
people to react, because we are a bunch of people that until the final hour,
yes,
we don't sign up, right?
yes,
So here's kind of a cool story that a local bakery I
yeah,
know, what he
yeah,
did, he owns Nothing Bundt Cakes. They do these bundt cakes. And so during January, everyone's on, their resolutions,
yeah,
and they're not eating sugar, not eating bundt cakes. But what he would do, instead of discounting, instead of like having, big sales, he would take his team and they would go into local businesses. They were going into hospitals and they were doing
I
pop-up shops
love
and
that.
selling their product there. And
Yeah,
so, and what they were doing, the next level of it is they were donating a certain percentage of those sales to the hospital, to the charity, to the pop-up, wherever they were headed. So yes, in essence, he was discounting, because instead of keeping 100% of everything he sold, he was donating a portion of
yeah,
it. But what it did is it got him out into the market
yeah,
in a creative way, and it kept his staff going, and it kept cash flow going during low seasons. So sometimes, instead of just always thinking slash prices, can we get creative?
yeah,
And I
yeah.
loved that story from
And
him.
how's a different way to deliver what we already are doing? Like you said, in a
Yeah.
pop up, but it could be, different ways. I love that. I
Yep.
love that story too, because that's how, again, moving inventory or your services, especially if you already have employees that you're paying anyways.
Right. Yeah.
So instead of discounting, let's talk about raising. So first of all, how frequently do you usually say it's a good time to, look at your pricing and readjust as needed?
I mean, I always made it part of my cadence to do it once a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Once a year, you got to, vendors are very, especially now in this season with
Mm-hmm.
inflation and,
Mm-hmm.
vendor pricing and everything. And so you can get in the habit of doing it maybe during your slowest month of the year, because you have time
Yep.
to do it.
Yep.
But what we see often, excuse me, is people set their prices and set them and forget them. And,
Yep.
or if sales aren't great, they blame it on that. And,
Yep.
that might not be the reason sales are bad.
Yep.
But yeah, I always say annually. What do you
Yeah.
think?
I like annually. I like what I find is a lot of my clients, there's a forethought that is required in just tracking data that allows that, because ideally I'd love to see a report that shows quarterly what your gross margins are by product or by service line, so you can really see, because again, there's seasonality, there might be some bumps that you see, and if you're waiting till a year, those prices, you might have lost out on 12 months. And I don't recommend that you actually adjust them every quarter, but you just got to track, just depending on different points in time throughout the year, how it may be
Yeah,
changing
smart.
costs or sales wise. So, but it does take reporting to be able to look at it based on your either service or your product. So I like that. So I like doing it quarterly. I also like, as we're talking about, if you can get very proactive prior to a new service, launch, or prior to a new product launch, because again, I think a lot of my clients get in the habit of, I'll just price it 50%. I'll just mark it up based on whatever the inventory cost of what is going into my good or whatever it may be, but really doing that analysis ahead of time, because it's a lot easier to start at the right price than adjust down the road too. So
Yeah.
just two things to keep in mind. So if you're doing it, whether it's quarterly or annually, let's talk about reasons you might want to increase your price. So we talked about decreasing. We're not really keen on that too. You mentioned already, okay, costs costs are one thing, right? I mean, we've seen them going up too. So consumers are ready for it right now because all of your costs.
Yeah.
So, so I think, but let's talk about other things. Anything come to mind? So for me, I know too, I talked to some people that they've reached their capacity, especially when you're service based and maybe you're a solopreneur, you have a small team. When you've reached capacity, demand is higher than your supply. That's a great time to think about raising your prices because you know that obviously people are buying. What else comes to mind for you?
You know, for me, it's just really having that gross profit margin benchmark and making sure that it's not eroding on you.
Yeah.
You know, for instance, I work with a promotional products company, and so they sell everything from pens to embroidery. And because of the variety of vendors they work with, it's really hard to stay in this gross profit margin benchmark that we set for them. And but if we don't pay attention to it and keep our eye on it, it can erode, it can get away from you quickly. And so last quarter, when we were reviewing the quarter, we noticed it dipped. Well, it's like, okay, what happened?
Yeah.
You know, so now they are going back and looking at their vendors to see if they're charging more. And time, once again, time.
Yep.
And, you know, it can take just a couple of orders that suck your time, you know, or customers that you're back and forth with, back and forth with. And that can really kind of erode that gross profit margin. So, yeah, I think, you know, you just have to, like you said, keep an eye on. I love your idea of quarterly, just, you know, not that you're raising your prices quarterly, but yeah, when demand is high, that's a good time. When costs have gone up, that's a good time. If you're not hitting your gross profit margin, that might be a good time. And, you know, maybe you just, when you first started, you just kind of threw a dart out there and hit a number and it wasn't getting you where you need to go. And it's just time.
I also think one other thing I'd add to that, because I absolutely agree with all that. The other thing is this may come into play more with service based, but is as you've invested in yourself, whether it's your knowledge, your expertise, you've been in business long enough. And actually I can even say with product based, because as you've invested in the business and maybe you've been able to automate more, you've been able to enhance your customer service through, you know, like tracking of their orders or whatever it may be, that's of value to the customer. So not only have you spent money, so your costs probably have risen, but maybe that was a one-time because it was a training, but I like to start as a baseline of what's your cost to make sure you're including the gross, like we said, we kind of a bottoms up as they call it. But I like to think top down too, is like, what is the value you're providing? And that should and is increasing. That goes back to the vulnerability too, especially if you're service based and it's your time. But you are absolutely worth more down the road after you've done this and you have a deeper expertise. So that's when I think more of the annual, what I really like to see in the annual is like, look at what the market is, look at what you've done over the last year, look at the results that your clients have gotten or that the services or how happy your customers are with your product, and think about raising because of the value they're getting too.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. As you grow, as you become more experienced, you should be charging more. And that's where you need to get a mentor or someone to help you because it is so hard to do that. We just struggle. But you know, it's true. And the other area too is if you go from consumer based to commercial, there's an area too where you can charge a little bit more.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of the way it is, you know, companies are most likely going to charge more. So if you're a photographer and you go from doing families to corporate, you know, events, you should be able to, you know, get more.
And that, I know a lot of, again, that goes to more of like a mindset too, which I absolutely know, but you're absolutely right. It's like the channel. And honestly, let's talk about it we can talk about a distribution channel industry you're delivering to, like B2B. If you're selling directly to a business, it's usually a higher margin than maybe direct to consumer. But similarly, we see that with, you know, if you want to sell through Amazon, which you get a huge consumer base, client base that you can sell to, but your margins are going to be a lot smaller too. So it's really looking at the volume versus the value and what you're and where you want to be positioned amongst all that. So I say that feeling like maybe that is overwhelming to some, but there's some very, as we talked about it, I feel like basic things to understand in terms of bottoms up, really factoring your costs and all the costs, thinking about where you want to be positioned. But it's an art also on top of that science, which is, like you said, that's why you readjust each quarter or each year as you see what the market is receiving and maybe, you know, and where the interests are in your product at any point in time versus anything else that's on the market.
And the other thing I see too, this is more on the emotional side of pricing, is be careful not to project your perceived thought on a price onto your stuff. You know, so let's say you're a graphic designer and you're thinking, oh, I would never pay anybody, you know, $50 an hour for graphic design. Well, that's your personal thought around money. Because let's be real, money's personal.
Yeah.
Money's got a lot of baggage to it. It's, a lot of it probably stems from the way we grew up and
Yep.
our family's beliefs around money. That doesn't mean your ideal client thinks it's expensive, but I see that a lot too. Where
That's
just
true.
because you think it's expensive or you think you
Hmm.
wouldn't pay for that service, like my husband, there's no way in heck he'd ever pay anybody $60 an hour to mow his yard because he loves to do it himself. So to
Yeah.
him, that's outrageous. But to somebody who doesn't want to mow their lawn, that's not outrageous.
It's so good for multiple reasons. One is if you're talking to the wrong customer, they're not gonna buy, right? So it really is depending on who you're talking to, and that goes back to marketing and really knowing your client and your customer and not being turned off by some of the initial feedback you get. But to your point too, it goes towards your own knowing yourself too, because sometimes you take for granted your expertise. You're like, it's easy. It comes naturally. Not that you haven't gone to school and studied it, but you love it. And so, I think a lot about like others. I never could be a teacher. I think they should be paid 17 times what they're paid
Yeah.
because I could never, ever, ever do that. And they have so much patience. So it's a really good point to mention too. So it's really about knowing your market and getting feedback from your ideal customer, not everyone out there, your friends or family who may love you, but aren't ever going to buy your services. So they're not the right ones too. And just also knowing that like people value what you're delivering, whether that's the product or the service, and
Right.
finding your person. So I love that's a really good point. Anything else you would add on this topic? I know we kind of
But I
jumped in
just
on
feel
it.
like it's a good reminder. We're just trying to remind everyone to get out there and
Yeah.
reevaluate where you're sitting today. Look at your gross profit margin because it's okay to make money. You went
Yeah.
into business to make
Yes.
money, even if your business doesn't feel like work, which most of us it doesn't. We love what we do.
I know.
And
I
but
know.
I
It's
always
really good.
say, people, really good people with good money go on to do great things. So
I love
get
that.
yeah, get
That should be
charged
your
what you're worth.
tagline. Can that
That
be
should be our
your tagline?
tagline. Get
I love
charged what
that.
you're worth, and then you can go do what you want with your money.
There you go.
So,
And know that you're providing someone with a service that they want to. So
yeah.
that should be the feel good instead of the feel bad that you're raising your
And
rates.
Brooke, this is really like you love digging into this. So I would highly recommend anyone listening, if they're just fuzzy about their prices, to reach out to you. I know you probably have lots of tools.
I do. I do have up on my website. Thank you for mentioning that. And as I know you do too, which is why I just love these conversations. And I hope this like truly, because it's stuff that we love and you and I talk about it. And that's why we wanted to do this. Is just, I
Right.
feel like we could jam out on this, but I know some people like struggle with this too. So if you are, just know that there's resources. My website also, Jen, I know you have some up there too. And that's just what we love doing. So even if it's just a conversation, say, am I thinking
Right.
about this right too? So,
Absolutely. If anyone's
yeah.
feeling stuck, reach out to either
Yes.
one of us. Happy to walk
Yes.
through it. Or
DM
just give you,
us, find us here
yeah,
on
right.
Instagram Live.
So,
Okay,
yeah.
so we have another session coming up. It will be, so we have two more in this series but also open if anybody who's listening or watching the replay later has a specific topic, a specific question, happy to go into that. But we will be talking about cash flow.
It's huge.
Huge, huge topic for any small business owner and paying yourself, which I know is a thing that is one of the main reasons most people go out of business, because you don't prioritize
Right.
yourself. So that will be coming up. But if there's anything else, again, let us know. And we'll repost this for the replay with some links to all the stuff that you may need.
Awesome. Well,
Anything
thanks,
else?
Brooke. As
Thank
always,
you.
it's fun.
I know this is fun. Thanks for doing this. Thanks for all of you that joined. And we will talk to you on the next one.
See you
Bye.
soon. Bye.